that running background soundtrack that kind of gets into our mind and talks to us, you had some techniques of how you dealt with that.
Yeah.
What were they? The negative perceptions.
The techniques came from. First of all, I want to say that the techniques, because it's a good question, but the techniques came from being in the arena. When Arjuna, the prince of the world in the Gita, goes into battle to win back his stolen kingdom, it's historical and it happened, but it's also a great allegory. When he went there, he was in the middle of the battlefield when he was overcome with fear, and he had to speak to Krishna, who was his chariot driver, who represented consciousness, who said, "This is a perception. You've got to overcome it." But he didn't overcome it from a classroom. Arjuna had 5 years in the heaven realms training for this battle, 5 years getting his weapons ready. And still, when he went into the battleground, he was overwhelmed by fear. And the fear he was overwhelmed with was perception. But the message was that he didn't overcome fear from a classroom. He overcame fear in the middle of the battleground. So if you look at the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter in the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is a section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is 15 volumes. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is just the fruits of the Vedas, which are hundreds of thousands of verses. So what it says in the Gita is this is a battleground, etc. This is a real war. Arjuna's fighting to win his stolen kingdom back. But then when you go to the Bhagavatam, volume 10, it talks about Lord Krishna doesn't call the battleground real anymore. He doesn't represent it as real anymore. He calls it a sea of nescience. In other words, nescience means ignorance. He said, you're not fighting against real people or real things. You're fighting against perception. This is a sea of nescience. And he said, you will not overcome it. You cannot overcome it. It's unassailable. But if you surrender to me, stepping over that battlefield of fearful perception will be as simple as stepping over the hoof print of a calf in the mud. That's how simple it will be. So what he's saying is, Krishna represents consciousness. So he's saying, if you surrender to consciousness, you'll be able to see this for what it is. It's a game. In the Quran, it says, this is just a game. This place is a game. So you start looking at it and going, all of these are having an effect on my body, but they are only perceptions. And when you actually fully accept that they're perceptions, then they can no longer harm you. They can no longer do anything to you. But you've got to know that and still walk around and still work in the world. And as Krishnamurti says, you're not dealing with a 50-year-old perception. You're dealing with a perception that is thousands of years old. It's a genetic inheritance or a genetic curse. It's in your DNA, but that can be changed because nothing has any reality until it's get engaged. Reality exists at the level of engagement. So whether it's nature or nurture, whether it's learned or inherited, it has to come up. It has to come to the Plenda gap here, which is where it enters into the heart space or to the will space. And at some point, we have to engage it or identify with it for it to become real. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. It has to come to the doorway of the heart, and we have to accept it. Once we see it's a perception, once we see it's an illusion, that it's not real, we can sit as an observer. And Eckhart Tolle's book is probably the best in the world for this technique. We sit as an observer and we watch and we go, do I want to engage that? Is that helpful? Is it kind? Is it going to benefit me and other people? If it's not, then I don't engage it. So we're no longer, sitting in the middle of lots of thoughts. What we are in the end is we are a bouncer on a nightclub door saying, you can come in, you can't come in. You're dressed right, you're not dressed right. You are sober and you're a good customer. You're pissed up and you're going to kick off in an hour's time. So you start to become the doorkeeper to the body of conscious will. So you start to recognize that it's you that chooses whether or not you engage thoughts thought forms. And again, when you look at the fear pyramid at the highest level, it's saying that it's not a thought, and it's not a perception, it's a being, it's a spirit.
So was that a technique that you used in terms of negative and positive thoughts, like pretending that you're your own doorman in your mind?
Yeah.
And
yeah, even as far back as when I wrote my first stage play 20 years ago, I was using that as a simile. You've got to be a doorman in your own head. But in order to make this work, in order for me to make it work, I've had to really reduce everything. I've had to get rid of needing anything from the world. Whilst I need to make lots of money, whilst I need validation, whilst I need, love from other people, whilst I need to be acknowledged by other people, I can't go in. I'm constantly looking for food outside. So once you let go of all that and you surrender all that and you recognise, there's only one thing I need, and that's God. And that God is in me. It's at the very centre of me. It's at the very still centre of me. Once I recognise that that's all I need, I stop going out and all my needs are met on the inside. And then it's just a matter of me keeping myself in that centre place and constantly, if I went on the door and I got pissed up, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to let the wrong people in, and I'm going to get hurt. A lot of my friends were badly injured or murdered when they were pissed, when they took their eye off the ball, when they become complacent. So, and all I was guarding there was a shitty nightclub. If I'm going to be guarding my body of conscious will, the thing that creates causation in the world, I need to be vigilant.
When you are in that position where a negative thought does come in and it starts wreaking havoc, how do you get rid of it?
Well, it's what we always used to say on the door. We were a courageous door. It was 4 of the top fighters in the city. And you stop the trouble at the door. That's what we always said. We stop the trouble at the door. Most people don't want to stop the trouble at the door, Paul, because they don't want to knock that guy back because he's a gangster. So they want to curry favour with him. They're frightened of him. They don't want to knock that person back because, he deals drugs in the club and, I might get a little cut of that. So people are currying favour, or they don't want to stop that guy because he's drunk. We don't want to stop that stag party because they might kick off. But when the trouble's on the door, it's contained, you can see it, it's right there, it's clear. But if the trouble gets inside and you let it in, suddenly one man can become one army, because they collect with other people in the club, they couple with other people, they open the exit doors, and suddenly you're not fighting one person, you're fighting an army. So our job was to notice it on the door. So the pressure of working as a bouncer, it's life and death, so people die. So when you go into an arena where it's a real war and you could die, you get extra sensory perception. So you look down the queue and you see a guy 5 down, you go, I know he's going to be fighting in the club in an hour's time by his behaviour. So you walk down the queue and you say, you can't come in tonight. So you're blocking somebody for something he's going to do in an hour's time, and you have to explain to him he can't come in, and he doesn't know. He doesn't know why you're not letting him in, but you know he's going to kick off because you can read that, you can see it. So we used to do that all the time. We used to walk down the queue and just say, you can't come in, you can't come in. They didn't like you, but we weren't trying to win favour. We were just trying to protect the good people in the club so they could have a good time. So our job was to clean the inside of the club up and make sure no negative entities came in. So it's the same with the mind door. Anything that comes in that is in any way unkind or in any way represents vice, in any way is selfish, we don't let it in. We just observe it. And of course, it creeps in, you get caught, but you start to, rather than it going in and collecting 20 mates, you start to catch it in the foyer and you go, I've let the wrong one in. And you go in and get them out.
Right, so it's catching it early.
Catching it early.
As soon as it enters.
If it gets in and you don't get a hold of it, it's like a virus. It is a virus. It's a parasite. It just multiplies. And suddenly, that's, a leak anywhere is a leak everywhere, isn't it? Yeah. So suddenly, one vice leads to a second vice and a third vice. And once it's inside you, it's living inside you, and it's feeding off you. And the problem with it is, once it's inside you, is that when it rises up and engages you, people aren't consciously aware that it's not them. They're not consciously aware that they have other energies or other beings inside them. And again, I'm talking in very, not metaphorically, I'm talking in very real terms. I'm saying that a perception is a being, it's a spirit. But is it a good spirit? But that's what a perception is. If you have a perception that somebody's, somebody's a terrorist because they're black, or because they're Muslim, or because they're Sikh, or because they're Hindu, or if you have a perception that somebody's a certain thing because of a colour, or because of a because of a race, or because of a culture, that's a perception. It's an idea that can become an ideology, and it can end up creating a cancer in you that can damage everything you project out. If I'm going to have a perception in, if I'm going to allow a perception in and work with it, it needs to qualify itself. I'm not going to, when people say, I did my research, what they mean is they've gone on the internet and they've looked at some sites, what do they call it? Anyway, I can't remember the exact name. It'll come to me in a minute.
Google. They've Googled it.
Yeah, they've Googled it, but they've gone on to conspiracy sites.
Oh, right,
and
okay.
That's not study, is it? It's looking at more and more conspiracy stuff isn't study. Study is to go inwards and say to God, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm aware that I can create. I'm aware that I can damage, and I'm aware that I can do good. But I'm really not aware what my purpose is and where I need to be. Please guide me.
And I suppose going inwards as well, you discover those ones that have got through the door, that you haven't even noticed.
Well, when you start to spiritually fast, you go, I'm going to get rid of every perception in my body that isn't right.
Even the ones that you're not aware that aren't right.
Oh yeah, they pop up. You start feeding them, Paul. You start feeding them, and they rise up, to be fed. To be engaged. They feed on your attention.
Have you had any surprises? So to cut you off, any things that you've gone, oh my God, I didn't know that, or this was in...
Man.
It must have been...
I sat in Coombe Abbey once in the deepest depression because something rose up and I got, fucking hell. I knew that, but I could never look at it. And it was to do with me and Sharon. This was many years ago, and I was so afraid of being abandoned by her. So afraid, because I'd been abandoned by other people who I loved when I was young. I was so afraid of that I was quietly controlling her life, quietly controlling it, and it was very subtle. Everybody thought I was very caring, but it was very quietly controlling. And it would, and I was hampering her freedom, and of course hampering my own freedom. And it came up, and I saw it, and I had a conversation with God, and I said, I don't want to lose her. And he said, but what if she didn't want to be with you? And I said, well. I said, if she didn't want to be with me, I said, I'd rather her be happy than be with me. And he said, so you care about her more than yourself? And I said, yeah, I'd much rather her do that. And I was able to just let go. So I stopped that. I recognised it, but it was difficult. I remember sitting in Coombe and I remember the feeling of it coming up and thinking, I can't act on this anymore. I can't engage this. This was a parasite that had been in me since I was a kid. And I had to stop acting on it. That took quite a while, but it was absolutely painful because I had to be prepared to lose Sharon. And Sharon was just a label. She just represented that feeling in me. If it wasn't Sharon, it'd be the next girl I was with, or it'd be a business partner. Everybody was always betraying me, Paul. There's a common denominator, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Everyone was always abandoning me. Everyone was always betraying me. So Sharon was just like the figurehead for it. So I just said to God, it's your will, it's not mine. You do whatever you want. Whatever you want, you think I need, give me. Whatever you think I don't need, please take it away.
You took full responsibility. You looked inwards and you said, I'm doing this. It's not...
So that was a spiritual fasting. When that rose up and had all the feelings of control, I just didn't go there. I was rationalising it before. But Sharon knew and I knew, but we just never spoke because it was so subtle. And other people perhaps knew, but not consciously. But so I just reduced that. And as I reduced that, my consciousness expanded and I could see more. And then I could see more. And eventually you have to be prepared for everybody and for everything to be taken off you, for everything around you to die.
Is it an endless journey?
Yeah, but that's it.
Like, is there an end?
But no, but it's a good way. I mean, there is an end. That's to unite with the Godhead, but it's just endless. We're just constantly projecting out of the Godhead, experiencing ourselves from an objective point of view and growing. So we're here to grow. We're here to experience and to grow and to love. So I'll just make sure that, you know, the only way I grow is by shrinking, by making myself smaller. So I reduce the perceptions, I reduce the concepts, I get rid of the precepts, I don't live to the social mores. As I reduce them, I'm able to expand. I sat with you this morning with you and Gabriela and showed you my view. That in Buddhism, they would call that the clear view. The clear view is when you get to a place where you go, anything is possible. Everything is possible.
Do you remember your first step on this journey?
Yeah. The first step was in the middle of a depression, thinking it was a depression, the perception of it being a depression, not realizing that I had an entity in me. I was possessed, you know, by this belief, by this perception that had become a cognition. In other words, a pocket of information, and that had become a full fat belief that nobody could be trusted. That was my belief, but that was a perception, and that kept throwing me into very deep depressions. And the depressions would have voices, and the voices would speak to me. So there was energies feeding off that, and when I went into this very deep depression, and I just constantly in this place of thinking, fucking, I've got this for the rest of my life. And I just remember this moment of righteous anger where I just thought, I'm not living like this anymore. I'm not living like this. I'm going to do something about this. And then this idea just fell into my head, and then I followed it, and then I followed it, and it started off just with little things like picking up a spider.
So it was a moment turning point.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
And at what point did you realise that it was everything's perception based?
Well, just recently. Yeah.
So even when you were on the door,
I'm still
for
growing.
example,
Yeah, after I'd come off the door, Paul, I didn't realise it was perception based there. I just knew on the door that I could handle the fear that I was getting, the adrenaline. I could handle it. I could deal with it. I could sit and observe it and watch it, and I could sit with it. I could sit in it for months and months. But it was still painful. It was a background noise, but it was painful, and it felt like a very real threat. So I knew that at that point that I could handle the feeling. It was only much later when I started to write deeper and deeper books and go into the complex nature of things that I realised, oh, this is perception. This is a perception. And I remember the moment where I thought, this is all just perception. And I thought, oh, well, that's okay. That's the answer. And then I went online and started to study perception. Fucking hell. It was a whole body of knowledge, endless body of knowledge, because perception, of course, changes according to culture, according to class, according to education. Every single experience in your life will determine your perception. So perception isn't just one thing. It is like a bunch of abstract information that creates, that picked up from your senses, that creates an idea of the world. But, I didn't realise at the time that perception had its own karma. So we've got karma and cause and effect, which is a fixed law within this reality. But within that, each perception has its own karma as well. So if I have a perception that something is fearful, so the perception is the cause. This is fearful. Then the effect of that will be massive adrenaline in my body, and that can be very destructive to the body. It can be very destructive to a person's life. So each perception contains its own version of karma. Isn't that fascinating?
And do you think that you can start off working on this on a perception level, or does it have to be tangible?
No, I think it's different for everybody. I think fundamentally it's the same thing. You're going to come to the same place. You're probably going to try a lot of different things, and you'll come to the same place, which is eventually you're just going to sit in front of it and say, okay, like Krishnamurti said before he died, he said, I've got a message for my students. Come round. And they come round and they're going to give them this really important secret. And he goes, I don't care what happens to me. I don't care. That's basically saying it's all perception. I can't be harmed. I am eternal. You can take this body. You can attack this body. But once we get to that place, like as a doorman, I started to read the signs and started to understand people, and I knew when people were posturing. I knew when people were a real danger. If they stood 5 yards back saying they're going to kill me, I'd learned from experience that wasn't a threat. A threat is somebody that creeps in secretly and tries to talk to you and tries to get inside your guard, So, yes.
And at that point, you weren't aware that was all perception as well.
No, that came much later. But when I fell into perception, I understood perception, and I thought I've got it. And then, of course, I started to realise that perception was a myriad thing. There was a million different, when you start looking at perception, you start going into, we go into biology again, we go into neurology because it's to do with the brain, we go into sociology because it's to do with society, we go into religion, we go into culture, and we go into the fact that, my perception is going to be different to yours because every one of my experiences is different. So everybody's perception is slightly different. It's so unique, but ultimately you can reduce it. That sounds really complex, but you can reduce it to the point where you just put a doorman on your own head and go, what am I going to let in? What am I not going to let in? And if that's complicated, if it's complicated about what to let in and what not to let in, you just go, I don't let in anything. I don't let in anything that doesn't come from a place of love. I don't let in anything that doesn't come from a place of kindness. So when people say to me, can you give us it in a nutshell, because it's complex, I'll just say, live kindly.